waters. U.S. Southern Command says it took control of a sanctioned ship conducting what it's called illegal activities, or illicit activities, rather, in the Caribbean this morning. Earlier, the U.S. European Command said it had seized another oil tanker in the North Atlantic. The U.S. sanctioned that ship in 2024 for allegedly carrying Hezbollah-owned cargo and providing support to Iran. It's also suspected of being part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet used to avoid sanctions. Now, sources tell ABC News the Trump administration plans to oversee the sale of Venezuela's oil indefinitely. Let's bring in senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez and ABC contributor, former UK national security official Steve Hill, for more. Hi, Louis. What's the latest on this second oil tankers?
Assisting the Coast Guard, and that is providing the helicopter lift to these vessels. It is U.S. Coast Guard personnel, highly kitted, highly trained elite units that actually carry out the interdiction, because this is a law enforcement action, because this vessel has been sanctioned. Now, we do know that earlier this week, over this weekend, that a host of some of these sanctioned vessels did leave Venezuela. Presumably, this was one of those vessels. It's key to remember that this is in international waters, and this is something that the United States is able to do, which was transport these elite teams to the vessel. Now, what we also have learned is that earlier today there was also another seizure in the North Atlantic, way up north, just south of Iceland and west of the United Kingdom, and that was another vessel. That was a vessel that had been pursued by the U.S. Coast Guard for nearly 2 weeks. After about on December 20th, the United States Coast Guard tried to board that vessel and did not succeed, and so the U.S. Coast Guard vessel has been following it. And what we've seen today is that, again, U.S. military personnel assisted in delivering U.S. Coast Guard personnel to board with a sanctioned vessel that was formerly called the Bella 1 and is now a Russian-flagged vessel. And recently, within the last week or so, it has become a Russian-flagged vessel. They called it the Marinera. And so the question now becomes, what is next, given that these are two vessels, two different parts of the world, but all linked to Venezuela, to Venezuela's illicit oil activity.
Steve, we're looking right now at video of these operations. How risky is executing something like this, especially with Russian naval ships nearby?
Thanks, Diane. Yes, I mean, there is some risk, but I think the operational risk is fairly limited. These are operations that U.S. Special Forces practice and are extremely efficient at. This is the last in a series of very operationally successful endeavors by the U.S. military. The risk, I think, is twofold. First of all, that there is Russian escalation. That seems really pretty unlikely. They did send ships into the area, but they don't seem to have been close by. And it seems that the Russians don't want to escalate. But there will be a risk of escalation, which is not kind of properly calculated, which is irrational, because this is President Putin, who doesn't always do what we think he's going to do. Secondly, I think there's an interesting dynamic here around that wider shadow fleet that Louis mentioned, which has been cutting submarine cables in the Baltics and across the North Atlantic, and whether the timid response that we've had from the Europeans hitherto to those operations by the Russians will be, if you like, put to shame by this rather bold American action that we've just been seeing.
And so, Louis, President Trump has said that he plans to keep the oil the U.S. seized. What do you make of that, and what are you watching for next?
Well, President Trump did say that, Diane, and it was unclear exactly what the process was going to be or what exactly he meant by that, but we have gotten some new information this morning from the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, who says that there is going to be a mechanism in place for the United States to essentially take over Venezuela's oil market. What the plan is, and this is an indefinite plan, so there's no time limit on this right now, and it's unclear exactly how this is going to work, is that the United States will take responsibility for any sales of Venezuelan oil, and then those funds from the sale will be managed by the United States, and in Secretary Wright's words, are going to be returned to the Venezuelan people. But it's unclear exactly how those funds are going to be returned to the Venezuelan people. But what is key is that now at least we have on the record new confirmation, new information from the Energy Secretary that a mechanism is going to be put in place for the U.S. to actually now manage manage Venezuela's oil affairs. Now, really significant here as well is whether, in fact, the Venezuelan officials who are currently in charge following Nicolas Maduro's arrest and capture this weekend, whether they are truly on board with this. What we have seen is very defiant tone, very defiant language from the former officials, from those officials of the Maduro regime who remain in place. Nicolas Maduro is in New York awaiting trial sometime later this year, but in the meantime, it is his former vice president who is serving as the acting president, and the defense minister and the interior minister, who were very close to Maduro, and were some were seen even more militant than he was, are actually still in the positions of power that they held before. So if the United States is actually doing this, it's unclear whether, again, they actually do have the buy-in from those Venezuelan officials.
Steve, what's your biggest point now? What are you watching for here?
In terms of Venezuela, I think that the takeover of these ships is the easy part. The difficult part will be giving some sort of forward transition plan to a more stable government, and a government that essentially follows US direction. The more interesting dynamic for me is the wider global impact of everything that's going on at the moment, which is to say, how does this impact Russia's plans, President Putin's plans in Ukraine? And most importantly, does it impact upon China? Does it somehow increase or decrease the chances of action in Taiwan? Again, I don't think that is likely. When we have the summits later this year, much more likely, in my mind, that President Xi and President Trump will come up with some kind of grand deal that they can both use for their domestic audiences in a positive way. So I don't think this has quite got the significance. It's very exciting, but I don't think it's quite got the significance that everybody is reading into it. In a month's time, we'll look back.